Well, hello there, and welcome to day 23 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And here we are, the motherlode, the mecca, the one above all. I finally decided to have a good run at Citizen Kane. About a week ago, I mentioned the Citizen Kane problem. Copyright Jordan Woodley. Although I'm sure others in incredibly heady articles have talked about something similar without using the actual phrase. But the idea that Citizen Kane has become such the source of contemporary Hollywood filmmaking, and as a consequence, most global filmmaking, that when you watch the film itself, it is difficult because you're recognising techniques that you've seen time and time and time again and gone, well, okay, this isn't doing anything particularly original, when in fact it coined the certain style, or it experimented with, or it was sort of the precursor to something that would be further refined and developed. But saying that, having now watched it top to tail, there is still a lot in this film that I still think is, heavy and complicated and rich. I was worried it was going to be quite a dry, very impenetrable narrative that really, hasn't aged in a way that as you watch it you would think, oh, well, this is one of these 30, 40, 50 films that just doesn't have any relevance today, when in fact it has more relevance than I could possibly have imagined. The only allusion I'm going to make is that it's quite fortuitous that this is the week that I decided to watch this film, considering the global social and political events of last week and going forwards, because it feels wildly relevant. Because the story of Charles Foster Kane is remarkably universal. It's funny, really, as I'm watching it, I was thinking about how fatalist the narrative is, in sort of the Greek tragedy sense of fate, or fete, that sense of, when people talk about the Rosebud thing, they talk about the narrative mechanics of it, and the fact that, that's the secret twist at the end, but it's not really the relevant factor, because yes, we as an audience know that he starts with the sled, and we find out the meaning of the sled at the end, and how important it was to him. However, it's not, as you would expect, about that. There's something... The best way for me to sort of describe it is, in narrative terms, that there's a terminology called Doyleist Watsonian principle, which is, of course, John Watson, quote unquote, tells us the stories of Sherlock Holmes, but of course John Watson is a fictional character, and so therefore Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is the actual one writing the stories as the real world author. So when you talk about Doyleist and Watsonian principles, what you're saying is this is the author's intention and this is the character's internal intention. And so, of course, the character's internal intention, the Watsonian intention inside, is for Citizen Kane, Charles Foster Kane, to reflect on the fact the last time he was happy in his life. But I don't think that was the Doyleist intention. To me, the core narrative is about Rosebud, or that moment that we are shown in the narrative, is the last point in which he has control. That, from a Greek tragedy point of view, fate has decreed exactly how his life is going to go from that point until the end, and there is almost no escape for him. It's quite funny, really, because you have the sense of really relevant sort of character things that you would see in characters even written today about, in his 20s he was a college or university dropout several times over, and then in his 20s he becomes this like revolutionary man of the people. But of course all of this comes from the fact that he comes from wealth and has the power and wealth to be able to make these bold movements. And so, in his 20s, he's a revolutionary and he's going to, lead the people against the authority, or the institutions. But then, of course, he isn't a man of the people, and consequently, the people turn on him like that. And then the second phase of the tragedy is the fact that he goes from trying to please all the people and failing to trying to please one person, and he can't even succeed at that. He tries to give Suzanne Alexander everything she could want, but she doesn't want it because he only knows how to give things through wealth and power and the ways that he has been built to show feeling. And again, completely fails. And so, of course, consequently, he ends up alone, and the only thing he can do is collect things and just stockpile things to fulfill something that will never be filled in him. And that is deeply tragic and deeply universal. It made me think, because the sort of the fatalist narrative, plays all the way back to Greek tragedies, with, the name has completely gone out of my head, but we're talking sort of the fall of Troy kind of story, or if you jump ahead to sort of Shakespearean with King Lear, or you go to even someone like Ebenezer Scrooge, which of course gives him a happy ending, but it's not really the point of the narrative, or and then we go to modern contemporary stories like Michael Corleone, or even real world people like Jordan Belfleur. The idea that maybe all of these characters were insofar as they are characters, but then they represent the path of power. It was never going to end well for them. They were never going to end, as soon as they started on their journey, in the Ozymandias sense of things, it was always going to end poorly and tragically. And, the tragedy of Charles Foster Kane is the fact that he spends the narrative trying to do his best. I mean, one of the quotes that, of course, is famous in the film is, "I would have been a great man if I hadn't been a rich man." And the idea is that, even though he has more power than anyone else, he can never be a good man because of it. The other aspects of things like filmmaking wise, people always point out, as I say, the Citizen Kane problem, but what's interesting about it is the fact, of course, it's experimenting with that. And so people point out the things that it apes, that is aped from it and used and developed, but I was trying to sort of focus on the things that obviously were experiments that didn't quite work, or things that, maybe later on were used, but people don't think, oh, Citizen Kane, like the fact that it opens dramatically and then switches to sort of a docudrama kind of style, or at least if it was made today, that would be a kind of docudrama kind of segment in it. And there's lots of things where I love the experimentation, the fact that some things really don't work in terms of framing and, and like cuts between, there's this strange thing where like a bird of some kind jumps out at the screen almost, and it's like, oh, why was that? Or during the major argument between Susanna and Kane, there's a woman screaming in the background, and neither me nor my fiancée Helen could work out why. And I'm sure someone will be able to jump on and say, oh, that's all. This is what it was. But the fact that so much is happening inside the, you know, inside the framing, inside the style, and so much of it, so much of it has been used to sort of develop filmmaking. It is, as everyone who's seen it would say, it is an extraordinary piece of work. And finally, there are Simpsons references that, after 20 years, have more meaning to me, which is quite a novel kind of realization. But I've done it. Citizen Kane is officially off of my list. Now to continue the endless bitter journey of watching all of the greats. But yes, I am very glad that I finally checked this off. So I'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks for joining me.